Hey everyone, and welcome to another great episode in this Selenium series. And in this one we are going to finish up filling in the forms in order to see some results from the booking.com website. Let's get started. Alright, so this was the stage that we have left the previous tutorial. Now, as you remember, when we selected the location that we'd like to go, then booking.com by default popped up the check-in or check-out date that the user can select. So it means that we can automatically try to select the check-in date and as well as the check-out date. Now, the time that I record this video will be May 2021. So if for yourself you are seeing a totally different result, then it probably means that you are watching this in some another date. So the results are going to be different for you. But I'm going to write a method that will be generic enough to support any kind of date. So let's go ahead and get started. So we need to somehow click on two dates, as the first one will represent the check-in and the second one will represent check-out. So I will just click on that, right click and say inspect. We do that one more time. And then I will go to the inspect window and let's see how we are going to automate clicking on those buttons. So you can see that it is actually this one, and it is a child element of this TD element. Now TD stands for table data, and what that probably means, it means that this element is part of a bigger HTML tag that is called table, which is designed for creating HTML tables. And this is also how this page represents the calendar. As you can see the table in here, and when I hover my mouse, you can see that it totally gets colored with blue background. So now this means that we need to somehow automate clicking on this one, and we can actually use CSS selector again by selecting an element with data date equals to some date. As you can see, in this case it is 2021 0516. So I'm going to copy this statement and I'm going to go back to PyCharm and let's try to automate that. So down here in booking.py, right where our booking class is, I'm going to type in one more method that we can call it something like select check, or we can just call it select date, something like that. And then we will receive two parameters like check-in date and as well as check-out date. And we can go down and we can say check-in element is equal to self.find element by CSS selector, and this is going to have as an argument the following statement. So I will open single quotes and I will use TD because this is the element we look to automate, and then we will open up and close square brackets and we will paste in the statement that we'd like to identify the element by. So now you can see that this state is hard-coded in here, and I'm just going to use formatted string and replace the value from being hard-coded to have the value of check-in date, which we receive as parameter. And then it totally makes sense to go down and say check-in element dot click. And then we are going to do this exactly same thing for the checkout date, because this is how we are going to select a range of date for deciding the dates of our vacation. So I'm going to go down and I'm going to say checkout date element, and it should be equal to self.find element by CSS selector one more time. And I'm just going to use the same statement like we did with check-in, and I'm going to replace the check-in date with check-out date. So down below we can again use checkout element dot click, and this should be enough to basically decide the check-in and check-out dates. And the only thing that we have to do now is go back to our run.py and execute this method by passing in two arguments. So it will be bot.select dates, and we are going to pass in check-in date is equal to, let's say, 2021-05 for May, and then day of the month will be 16. And then we are going to do the same for check-out date, and we will pass in 2021 05 23, for example. Alright, so let's go ahead and test our program. Now, we understand that we don't have to really test the change currency anymore because this works, so I can allow myself to comment this just for now. Alright, so let's run this out and see what happens. Okay, so this works very well, and you can see that we have the check-in and check-out dates. Now, let me tell something very important in here. Actually, let's say that you'd like to automate for selecting dates that are 2 months or 3 months from today. So this is something that I'm not going to show in this tutorial, but you have all the utilities to basically achieve this by yourself. So say that you want to select some date that is going to be 4 months from today. So this means that you have to automate clicking on this next button 3 times, and then you will have the option to select range of dates that is 4 months from today, which in my case will be September 2021. So I just wanted to mention that I know that this program is not going to support selecting vacations in dates like 5 months or 6 months from today, but again, you have all the tools that you can try to automate this action by yourself. Alright, so the next thing that I'm going to straightforward show in here is how we can select the adults to decide our vacation. And to do that, we need to first simulate clicking on this area, and then we are basically looking for automating clicking on this minus sign or this plus sign to basically decide the adults. Now again, we will try to write a method that will basically receive a parameter with adults count, something like that, and then we will try to simulate deciding the adults for our vacation. Now I'm not going to show for children or rooms because this is going to be probably the same logic that we need to repeat, but again, you have the option to extend your bot in whatever way you'd like to. Alright, so now first, let's start identifying this entire area in here. So inspect and do it again. Alright, so we look for the element that will basically color the entire area of this selection button. So I think this should be this label with the ID of XP guest toggle. So I know that the font is a little bit small in here, but this is basically what it says here. It says to us XP guest toggle. So I'm going to just copy this value and I'm going to go to our bot and I'm going to go down and write one more method that we can again name it something like def select adults, like that, and then we will receive count as a parameter, and we will see how we are going to control the count of our adults in this method. So down below I'm going to say selection element, something like that, and I'm going to use self.find element by ID, and I will paste the value that I have copied previously. So you can see that it is XP double underscore guests double underscore toggle, and I'm going to just selection element dot click like the following. And now let me pass in some default value in here like 1, so we will not receive errors when we call this from run.py. And then I will go here and I will say bot.select adults, something like that. And now let's see what will happen if we will run our program. So until now, we should expect to see only this page being popped up. I mean this area, not the page, and it looks okay. It looks like it works, so we can continue on to see how we are going to control the adults for our vacation. Alright, so now we have to somehow control how we are going to select the adults count. Now this might be a tricky action to take, because say that you want to go with 3 adults, then it means that in that case you only need to automate clicking on the plus sign once, because the default value is 2. But what if one day the default value is not going to be 2 adults in booking.com? Say that the default value is going to be changed to something like 4, 5, 3 or any other count. So we can actually be more smarter rather than trying to automate clicking on the plus sign depending on whatever adults count we are going to pass in our method. So we can first try to decrease the adults count to the minimum value, And then we can have more control how many times we really need to click on the increasing button. So at first, we can write some logic to decrease the count of adults until the value reaches one adult, because this is the lowest value of adults that we can have. And then we can try to click on the plus sign depending on the adults count that is passed in. So this is a more generic way to complete this kind of task, and it is going to be very interesting to implement that. So I'm going to go to our PyCharm, and you know what, before that we need to understand how we're going to click on the decrease button. So let's do inspect and see how we are going to identify the element of decreasing. So let's expand this and see what is going on here. So you can see that when I hover my mouse in here, then this button of decreasing is being colored with the green background. So this is the button that we look to automate clicking on. And you can see that it has a unique value of area label with the value of decrease number of adults. And I believe that we are going to see the same thing for increased number of adults with area label as its key. So I think it should be this one. So if we open this element and see its attributes, so I'm just going to move here, and all right, there it is. So you can see that it has area label increased number of adults. So this is the approach that we're going to identify those buttons. And let me basically copy this statement and try to find this element by CSS selector. Okay, so right under the select adults method, we are going to use something like decrease adults element is equal to self.find element by CSS selector, and we are going to pass in button and open up and close square brackets and basically paste the key value statement that we have copied previously, and you can see that it is area label is equal to decrease number of adults. Now we need to somehow simulate clicking on that button until the adults count reaches 1, because as we said, it will allow us to have more control to basically decide the adults count. So for that, I'm going to use while true, and then inside this while true, we will write an if statement that will look up for the value of adults count, and once it reaches the value of 1, then we will go outside of our while loop. So I'm going to say here while true, and I'm going to go here and basically fix the indentations, and then I'm going to go down and I'm going to say decrease adults element dot click. Now if I leave the code as it is, then it is always going to try to click on decrease button, which is obviously not what we want, but we want some logic to basically identify if the value reached the number of 1, and if so, we'd like to get out of the while true. So it is going to be something like if the value of adults reaches 1, then we should get out of the while loop. So let's see how we're going to identify this. So I'm going to go back to our browser and I'm going to search for the element that displays the value. So it should be this one in here where my mouse is pointing. Let me zoom in a bit so you can see more clean. And you can see that I'm pointing exactly to here. So let's do inspect, and you can see that it actually depends on this span element, and you can see that it has the text of 1. So what that means? It means that we can try to basically find this element and see what its value. Now if I add here plus, then you can see that it got updated, so it means that this is the exact element that we need. Now I can actually see in this inspect page that we have more elements that are being updated with the adults count. And you can see up top in input in here that let me zoom in. So you can see that this element is actually getting updated continuously as well. And the reason I want to select this element is actually because it has ID. And if you remember, I said that the ID is the strongest attribute that the HTML element could have to identify its uniqueness. So if I click on plus here again, then you can see that it gets updated. So I'm going to just find this element by the ID of group adults, and I'm going to go back to PyCharm and see what we can do with this element. So I'm going to go here and say adults value element is equal to self.find element by ID, and it should be the value of group adults. Alright, so now that we have control in the element that displays the value of adults count, then we should somehow receive the count of the adults. Now, this is something that we did not learn how we can do, because we only learned about actions like clicking or sending keys, but we did not learn how we can receive a value of some key in HTML elements. So it is going to be by using the adults value element, which we have identified in here, and then it is going to be basically by launching a method that is called getAttribute. Now, getAttribute is basically a method that receives a key name, and then it tries to give you back the value of whatever attribute it is. So if we go back to our browser, you can see that we need to work with this key that is called value, because this is what displays the adults count, right? So we need this key. So I'm going to go here and go back to PyCharm and basically pass in here value. And this entire statement should give back the adults count. Should give back the adults count. So I'm just commenting this up because the code is starting to be more complex, so we can remember what each line is responsible for. So down below, I'm going to type in a conditional, and it is going to be much better if we will assign this entire statement to a separated variable. So I can say something like adults value is equal to that entire statement. And let me just write here some split lines because we want to have more organized code. Okay, so down below, I can say something like if adults value is equal to 1 like that. Now, I already know that this statement is going to give us back an error because by default, the get attribute returns the value as strings, and we cannot write if conditionals with comparing string to integers. So we are going to convert this adults value to integer exactly in here, and then we are going to check if it is equal to 1. Now, once it equals to 1, then we can break the while true. So let's see if this logic works. So we should go ahead and test the run.py file by executing it, and we should see the adults count being set up to 1 adult. So now I'm going to test this up. And alright, so you can see that it works perfect. The adults has been changed to 1, and the only thing that we have to do now is identifying this plus button and basically say that we'd like to go with 10 adults. Then we'd like to launch a for loop that is going to click on that button 9 times. So let's go back to PyCharm and implement that. Now, to really test if it works properly, then really we are going to assume that we are having 10 adults in our vacation. So I'm just going to pass this argument when we call this method. So now let's go to our method and minimize this while true because we have finished working with it. And we can say increase button element is going to be equal to self.find element by CSS selector one more time. And if you remember, it was a button with the key value pair of area label is equal to, and I'm going to open those double quotes and say increase with capital I number of adults with capital A. And then I'm going to go down and I'm going to launch a for loop applying the range built-in function, so we can really have control in amount of times that this for loop is going to execute. So I'm going to say for I in range, and we are going to use range of count minus 1, because if you remember, I said that we should decrease this by 1 to really achieve the exact count that is passed in here. So we are going to say increase button element dot click, and that's it. Now, I'm not sure if you know or not, but basically if you are not going to refer to the variable that is used in here, then by convention you don't really need to pass in a variable name like I or a or something like that. You can just use underscore like that and leave it as it is. And this is just a convention in Python that says that we are not going to make use of the iterable value. So now we are ready to test the entire program. So I'm going to launch our run.py file, and we should see the adults count being set to 10. So if we run our bot and wait a minute, alright, so you can see that it really works perfect. At first, we use this safety logic to basically set the adults to 1, and then we have full control of the adults count that we'd like to set. Now this is really generic and working perfect, because even if we are going to pass in count equals to 1 from our method, then what is going to end up happening? It is going to go to here, and it is going to try to apply a for loop in range of 0, and it is never going to run, because if you are having a for loop with range of 0, then you are basically not iterating over anything. So the adults count is going to remain 1, and that is perfect. So this logic really works, and we are basically ready to go ahead and click on the search button to really test if we are going to receive any results. So it is going to be very easy, because by convention each search button in whatever site it is mostly having a key value pair that says type equals to submit, something in that kind. So we are going to click on inspect and see if this is the same for this website. So if we expand this and go here and look up for this button, and you can see that it has type equals to submit. So again, we can automatically try to basically identify an element with CSS selector with HTML type of button that has this key value pair. So if we go back to PyCharm, we can easily just create one more method that we can call it click search, and we can basically receive nothing in this method because there's not going to be any argument we'd like to pass in, and we are going to say straightforward self.findElement by CSS selector, and we should find a button with this key value pair and basically assign this to a variable like search button, and then later on we'd like to click on that. Alright, so here I'm just going to call this bot.click search and see if everything works properly. Now to really test the entire logic, let me uncomment the change currency and change this to USD to really see if everything works. And let me challenge this program a bit and pass in another date. So we can maybe say here 19 and pass in here 25 and really test if everything just works and functions properly, even though I have customized the values a little bit. So if we run our program and basically do nothing, so I'm not going to touch my mouse at all and see if everything works. Okay, so currency, date, adults, search, perfect, just perfect. Everything really works well, and we see some results about different hotels from this booking.com website, and this is just exciting because we really have some results going in here. And in the next episodes we are going to dive into more complex stuff because we need to only identify the best deals, and by saying best deals we need to somehow automate applying filtration to that results, and applying filtrations is going to be a not easy action that we look to automate with Selenium as well. So it is going to be very challenging and interesting to see what I'm going to do in the next episodes, and I really hope to see you in that episodes as well. Alright everyone, so I really hope that you have a great time watching this series, and I really hope to see you soon in my next episodes as well. Don't forget to click on the like button if you enjoyed in here, and as well as subscribing to my channel. I will see you in the next episode.